Welcome to another Jabba's Palace roll call, where we look at the backstories and merchandise for some of the lesser-known characters from Jabba's Palace. Today's character is Malakili. Malakili was originally just called the Rancor Keeper, and that's still how he's best known to most Star Wars fans today. His only appearance in the films was during the Rancor Pit sequence in Return of the Jedi. We get our first glimpse of the character as Luke manages to slip through the Rancor's legs and reach the gate to the pit. Malakili and the other Rancor Keeper try and keep Luke from leaving, but of course he's best remembered for the sequence after the Rancor is killed. Luke picks up a skull and throws it at the controls for the portcullis, causing it to come crashing down on the Rancor's neck, killing it. We see the Rancor Keeper come out and look at it in shock. While the other guard grabs Luke, Malakili's only thoughts are for the Rancor. Even watching this as a child, without knowing any of the backstory behind this character, it was obvious that Malakili had deep feelings for the Rancor. And for a second anyway, it made you think that maybe things weren't quite as black and white as they seemed. Although there is a comic element to it as well, I find this moment to be genuinely touching. In his original 1983 review of Return of the Jedi, Roger Ebert had this to say: "Here is just one small moment in Return of the Jedi, a moment you could miss if you looked away from the screen, but a moment that helps explain the special magic of the Star Wars movies. Luke Skywalker is engaged in a ferocious battle in the dungeons beneath the throne room of the loathsome Jabba the Hutt. His adversary is a slimy, gruesome reptilian monster made of warts and teeth. Things are looking bad when suddenly the monster is crushed beneath a falling door. And then, here's the small moment. There's a shot of the monster's keeper, a muscle-bound jailer who rushes forward in tears. He is brokenhearted at the destruction of his pet. Everybody loves somebody." While I think this might be the first time that Malakili has been described as muscle-bound, I think Roger Ebert did an excellent job of summing up the appeal of this sequence and how moments like this help elevate Star Wars beyond the level of simple space adventures. As with so many characters from Jabba's Palace, much of what we know about Malakili's backstory comes from the book Tales from Jabba's Palace, specifically the short story A Boy and His Monster, The Rancor Keeper's Tale by Kevin J. Anderson. Of course, after Disney's acquisition of Star Wars, these are considered legends that may not be entirely canon, but we're going to just forget about that for now. In the story, we see how Malakili originally worked for the Circus Horrificus, which featured many deadly monsters. Malakili had managed to survive 7 seasons at the circus without being eaten, a new record. After a spaceship containing a rare and dangerous alien specimen crash-landed on Tatooine, it was discovered by Jawas in a roving sandcrawler who brought it to Jabba. Jabba quickly claimed it as his new pet and bought out Malakili's contract so that he could be in charge of this new addition. This was, of course, the Rancor. Jabba liked to feed people who displeased him to the Rancor, R.I.P. Ula. But he also enjoyed pitting the Rancor against other creatures just to see which would win. After one of these fights, Malakili helped the monster recover from some painful injuries, and the two started to bond. Later, Malakili somehow managed to sneak the Rancor out of the palace for a walk, when his speeder malfunctioned, leaving him alone and stranded, facing the prospect of either dying from heat stroke in the desert or from torture in Jabba's palace. Malakili was cornered by some Tusken raiders and had nearly given up hope when the Rancor appeared and made short work of his attackers. He knew that Jabba would eventually find an opponent that could defeat the Rancor, and he couldn't bear the thought of leaving his new friend to die. So he secretly contacted Lady Valerian, a rival crime lord, and offered her information about Jabba's palace in exchange for passage for him and the Rancor to an isolated planet where the two of them could live out their years together. But as luck would have it, he had arranged for their escape on the day that Luke Skywalker had arrived at the palace. Their unfortunate encounter put an end to any plans that Malakili had of retiring in obscurity with his friend. But he did manage to survive the death of Jabba the Hutt, and according to the book's epilogue, he and Porcellus, the palace chef, managed to loot enough money from the treasury to open the Crystal Moon restaurant in Mos Eisley, which was quite successful. More recently, the books Aftermath Life Debt and Aftermath Empire's End by Chuck Wendig filled in some of the blanks between Malakili's escape from the palace and his opening of the restaurant. It seems that Malakili crossed paths with Cobb Vanth, who later appeared on TV in The Mandalorian. Cobb hired Malakili to train some Rontos, and even put him in charge of the education of a Huttlet called Borgo. A criminal organization called the Red Key Raiders had been trying to install Borgo in Freetown as a kind of a puppet leader. Malakili became the young Hutt's protector and mentor, and I'll have to say, this is one TV show I'd pay good money to see. But there have been other interpretations of Malakili's origin story. Most notably is a 2019 fan film called Birth of a Monster, which posits that Malakili and the Rancor's history went all the way back to childhood, when Malakili as a boy discovered the Rancor's egg in a cave on Tatooine. It's available here on YouTube to watch, so I'll link it in the video description and I won't spoil the story, but suffice it to say that it's quite well done and worth watching. As an aside, this really reminds me a lot of this art piece by Chris Gugliotti entitled BFFs. It shows Malakili apparently picking the Rancor out of a box as if he were a puppy and then gently raising it. He comforts it when it's scared, plays Fetch the Jawa, and goes for spirited runs with it, before finally presenting it to Jabba. While it does get injured in the fight with Luke, the Rancor Keeper manages to nurse him back to health. And in this separate art piece, titled Epilogue, the two get a little good-natured revenge against Luke. The Rancor Keeper was played by British character actor Paul Brooke, who has had a distinguished career outside of Star Wars, and, judging from his comments in an interview with StarWarsInterviews.com, he seems a little bit amazed that a very short job like this is what a lot of people will remember him for. He mentioned that he had no idea what the Rancor looked like when shooting his scenes, and that the whole process was very brief, and primarily entailed bursting into tears on cue. Although he's retired now, he does occasionally go to conventions, and interestingly, he said he first saw a Rancor in person in 2018 when he met the life-size Roxy the Rancor at Lexington Comic and Toy Con in Lexington, Kentucky. You could say that Malakili is a favorite with cosplayers at conventions, partially because his scene was so memorable and the costume is easy to make and very recognizable, but also because he gives guys who might not have the physique to pull off someone like Boba Fett, say, the chance to do some cosplay. And this is the point in the video where we look at some of the merchandise made for this character. This one here is perhaps the most famous example. This is the vintage Kenner figure from 1983. And unfortunately, this one is missing his hood and his weapon. I don't know what happened to them. I used to have them. They're here in this photo, as you can see, but I haven't been able to find them as I was making this video. Now, maybe it should come as no surprise that a figure of a half-naked fat guy was not the most popular one and didn't sell all that well in stores. In fact, in the UK, they had a deal where you could get a free Rancor Keeper for every 6 figures you bought, so it actually seemed like they wanted people to have multiples of these. The next action figure version of this character came in 1997 with the Power of the Force 2 line. This actually was available in a couple of different packaging variations. On the left we have the standard one with the photo of the character, and on the right you can see there's a freeze frame action slide. And you may also notice that this is the first version to actually call him Malakili with Rancor Keeper in parentheses. I think the figure itself is actually pretty well done, especially compared to some of the other figures in the line. His waist is weirdly loose, though, almost like he has an action feature, although I don't think they said that he did. His hat is glued on, which is nice because you can't lose the darn thing. Although I'm not sure this or the vintage figure looks a whole lot like Paul Brooke. Other than that, I think this is a fairly decent version of the character. And the last version of Malakili as an action figure came in the Legacy Collection in 2009. This one simply says Malakili and it has no mention of Rancor Keeper on the package at all. As you can see, his hood is once again removable and losable. This figure is one of the series that came with Droid Factory Build-A-Droid parts as well. In terms of the sculpt and paintwork, this is clearly the best of the three, although, again, maybe not the best likeness to the actual actor. He's got 14 points of articulation, which is quite a few for a character like this, although some of them are a little strange. So if you look at his legs, he doesn't actually have bendable knees, but they are cut so that they can swivel. But, you know, it's still a lot better than we got with the previous versions. I'm not entirely sure what they could do to improve on this figure if they were to come out with a modern version. Maybe improve the head sculpt a little bit would be about all I could think of. And just to give you a sense of scale, here are all three of them together. You can see that the modern version, or the most modern version anyway, the Legacy Collection version, is by far the smallest, which is kind of interesting. By the way, since he's probably not going to get a video of his own, I thought I would also introduce the character of Giran, who they released at the same time as the Legacy Collection Rancor Keeper. He is the sort of assistant Rancor Keeper, I guess you'd say, who was trying to console Malakili after the Rancor's death. This is a really excellent figure, actually one of my favorites from the entire line. I don't have any complaints about it whatsoever. We'll have to go back in time a bit to 1990 for our next entry. This is the Rancor Pit Collector Set from West End Games and Grenadier Models. This is a set of metal models. The Rancor Keeper himself is reasonably good by the standards of the time. I mean, these were not the most detailed models in the world, but you can certainly tell who he's supposed to be. And the Rancor himself is a very large and very heavy model that you had to assemble from 5 different pieces. Our next item is from the Star Wars Mighty Beans collection from 2010. These were little plastic capsules with metal ball bearings in them. Really kind of an odd product if you think about it. They had quite a few Jabba-related characters, including a Rancor Keeper, although, as I recall, I had to actually order the Rancor Keeper from Australia because he was not released, or at least very rare, in the US. Here's the actual capsule itself. They're relatively small, and I think, aside from the whole collecting aspect of it and getting all the different characters, they did have little tracks and things that you could kind of make them travel on and play with, but kind of a weird product, really. But I gotta give them props for having so many relatively obscure characters available. I really appreciated that. I'm sure you fans of LEGO have been wondering if this set would show up. This is the Rancor Pit set, number 75005, which included the Rancor Pit itself and the Rancor, but also Malakili as a minifigure. And I think this is a pretty well done figure. It comes with his usual hood and his weapon that you have to build, as well as a key that he can use to open up part of the pit there. On one side of his head, he's got sort of a stoic expression or a slightly annoyed expression, and on the other side, of course, we have his sad expression for when the Rancor dies. Oh. It's worth mentioning, by the way, that Malakili appeared as a character in the LEGO Force Awakens video game if you got the special Jabba's Palace character pack that was exclusive to GameStop. I actually did a review of that pack a number of years ago, which you can see in the upper right. This wasn't that great of a character, really. He didn't have much in the way of special powers, although he could use the strength handles that only some characters could use. Malakili also made an appearance as one of the Vinylmation figures that Disney released. These were sort of urban vinyl figures that were all shaped like Mickey Mouse, but painted in different ways. He was only available in a 2-pack with the giant Rancor you can see in the background, and I think he was only sold at Star Wars Weekends at Disney in 2014. Our last commercially available item is this Gentle Giant Rancor and Keeper statue from 2007. This is quite a large and heavy statue, as you may be able to tell in comparison with my hand. It's actually probably a little bit bigger than it appears on screen. This is meant to be in scale with Gentle Giant's other 7-inch scale statues, so it's quite large, could probably almost pass for Black Series, 6-inch Black Series scale. The Rancor Keeper himself is pretty well done, I would say. It's kind of typical for their humanoid statues of the time. Their skin was often a little bit artificial looking, but aside from that, I think it's a good looking statue. The facial sculpt, though, doesn't so much look like Paul Brooke as perhaps Judge Reinhold, so that's a little bit of a head scratcher. We'll look at this statue in more detail in another video to, see the details of the Rancor itself, because it is definitely something that deserves a little bit more attention. But today we're just going to focus on Malakili. You can see that he's just attached to the base with a metal rod that goes in a hole. The Rancor itself is permanently attached to the base. And he's holding a metal chain that's attached to the Rancor's manacle there. While there has been some talk of getting a Gentle Giant mini bust of the character, that has yet to materialize, so this is, at the moment, I think, the highest end piece representing this character. Aside from those, though, I have commissioned a couple of art pieces for this character. One is this wooden figure by John Sukup. It's part of a larger sort of selection of Jabba's Palace figures that I commissioned from him, and I made a video about that a while ago, which you can see in the upper right there. He, I think, captured the kind of sadness of the character pretty well in the face. And the last piece I'd like to show you today is this cute version of Malakili and the Rancor that Jeff Confer did for me. I commissioned this from him in 2010 as part of a larger series of pen and ink drawings representing cute versions of various Star Wars characters. I did a number of Jabba's Palace ones, but also just sort of the main characters in Star Wars as well. I have quite a number of those that were hanging in my son's room for a number of years. This one, I asked him if he could represent the bond that existed between the Rancor and Malakili, and I think he did a great job doing that. So that'll about do it for Malakili. There have been a few other minor things, such as trading cards and the like, that have represented the character as well, but I think in terms of the main merchandise, this is pretty much it. Although, feel free to let me know if I've overlooked something. This video was made possible with the support of my patrons, including these Palace VIPs right here. If you'd like to help support me on Patreon, you can pledge as little as $1 a month to get access to some behind-the-scenes posts, early videos, and more. There's a link in the video description to my Patreon page, so check it out for more information. Thanks for watching!